At the cocktail hour, under the low amber lights of the ballroom, I stood by the corner table nursing a gin and tonic. The stem of the glass was cold against my fingers, condensation gathering in a ring on the linen. My sister leaned in so close I caught the faint trace of her perfume. "You've lost your place," she murmured, not looking at me, as if she were commenting on the weather. I didn't answer. I didn't even turn. I just took another slow sip, letting the sharp taste of gin and lime press against the back of my tongue. Around us, glasses clinked. A waiter in a crisp white jacket floated by with a tray of shrimp cocktails, and someone laughed too loud near the bar. It was the kind of laugh that carried a hint of forced cheer, the kind that fills a silence no one wants to name. My sister smoothed the skirt of her dress, her nails painted the same pale pink they'd been at every family function since we were teenagers. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. The words were already working their way under my skin like a splinter you can't quite reach. From across the room, I spotted Martin, my mother's attorney, standing near the double doors. He held a manila envelope in one hand, the other tucked into his pocket, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the crowd. When his eyes swept in my direction, they passed over me entirely, as though I were a stranger. My sister had already moved on, greeting a cousin, tipping her head back in a laugh I knew was for show. I stayed where I was, letting the music from the hired string quartet blend with the murmur of voices. It was a celebration my mother's 40th wedding anniversary, and yet, in that moment, it felt more like a wake. The ice in my glass shifted. A drop slid down the side and landed on my thumb, cool and startling. I thought of the last time we'd all been together in this hotel ballroom my parents' anniversary 5 years ago, when I'd flown back from Chicago on no notice because Dad had called in a panic about the catering deposit. I'd written the check myself, told them it was my gift. No one mentioned it again. I watched the way people circled my sister, leaning in when she spoke, nodding as though she were already the host of something I hadn't been invited to. The phrase she'd used, "lost your place," wasn't about a chair at a table. It was bigger than that. It was a shift in the ground I'd been standing on for years without realizing it was crumbling. I glanced again at Martin. He was speaking now to Aunt Lillian, who clutched his arm like she was balancing herself on a ledge. The envelope was still in his hand, its corner worn soft as if it had been handled too many times. He caught me looking and, just for a fraction of a second, his mouth tightened. Not a smile, not a greeting. Just a flicker, there and gone, like a shadow passing over glass. A server offered me a plate of bruschetta. I shook my head. My appetite had vanished, replaced by a low hum of awareness. The air smelled faintly of citrus and champagne, but beneath that was something metallic, like the tang of a penny between your teeth. My sister's words replayed without her voice attached now, as if they'd detached and lodged themselves somewhere in the back of my skull. "You've lost your place." The quartet shifted to a slow, sweeping piece I half recognized from old movies. People swayed, glasses tilted, conversations dipped into private pockets. I stayed still, my heels anchored to the carpet. Years of showing up, of writing checks no one remembered, of rearranging my own life to fit the shape of their needs, all of it felt suddenly visible to me in a way it never had before, like seeing a painting under the wrong light and noticing every crack in the canvas. Martin disappeared through the side door, the envelope tucked under his arm. My sister glanced my way again, just briefly, her smile wide enough for the photographers, but her eyes flat. I took another sip, the gin nearly gone, and felt the weight of the moment settle in. Not an ending yet, but the precise second when you know one is coming, as sure as the drink in your hand. 15 years earlier, I hadn't been standing in a ballroom with a drink in my hand. I'd been in my mother's kitchen, the one with the peeling floral wallpaper and a dishwasher that rattled like it was swallowing rocks, holding a stack of unpaid medical bills. She'd had her first stroke then, and the doctor said the recovery would be long and expensive. My sister had just been promoted at her marketing job in Boston and claimed she couldn't get the time off. So I stayed. I put my own career in Chicago on hold, turned down a management position I'd been working toward for 3 years, and moved back into the town I swore I'd never return to. At first, I told myself it was temporary, 3 months, maybe 6. I sold my condo to cover the hospital debt, signed my name on loans so my parents wouldn't lose the house, and picked up contract work I could do from my mother's dining room table while she slept in the recliner. Those months turned into years. Every time she needed another procedure, I found a way to pay for it. Every time Dad fell behind on the mortgage, I covered the difference quietly so the bank wouldn't call. I became the invisible net under all of them, stretching until the fabric of my own life was thin. My sister visited twice a year, always breezing in with expensive handbags and stories about rooftop parties. She never stayed long enough to see Mom struggle through her physical therapy or to hear the sound of her crying in the bathroom at night. But she always managed to leave with something jewelry borrowed for a wedding, a check from Dad, just until my bonus clears. I let it slide. Back then, I thought keeping the peace was more important than keeping score. I never told them I'd cashed out my 401k to pay for the new wheelchair ramp, or that I'd given up renewing my professional license because the continuing education courses were too expensive. They called me dependable, which really meant I was the one they could lean on without asking if I was standing on solid ground myself. Even when I finally went back to work full-time, I kept paying the property taxes on their place, kept covering the winter heating bills when Dad's hours got cut. It wasn't that they didn't notice. It was that they treated it like background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator always there, always running, nothing to think about. The thing about long-term sacrifice is that it becomes invisible, even to the one making it. You don't see the cost piling up until one day you realize you're living in the smallest room in your own life. I remember the day I bought them the car. Mom's old sedan had given up for good, stranding her at a doctor's appointment. My sister suggested they lease something and split the payments, but when it came time to sign the paperwork, she backed out, claiming she'd just put down a deposit on a condo in the city. I wired the full amount to the dealership without a word. That was how it always went. I stepped in, she stepped back. And in every holiday photo, we stood side by side like the roles were balanced, like none of the weight was mine alone. The last few years before tonight, I noticed subtle changes. My sister's visits became more frequent, her conversations with my parents longer and quieter. Sometimes they'd stop talking when I walked into the room. Once, I found a brochure for an estate planning seminar in the kitchen, my sister's handwriting scrawled in the margins. When I asked about it, Mom waved it off. Just something your sister picked up. Don't worry yourself. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe the years I'd poured into this family still meant something unshakable. But I'd learned long ago that in our house, silence was rarely empty. It was storage for the things no one wanted me to know. There was one winter, maybe 4 years ago, when I was working 2 jobs, my day job and a night shift at the hospital, just to keep up with Mom's prescriptions. My sister called one night from a ski lodge, laughing about the view from her room. She didn't ask how things were at home, and I didn't tell her I was standing in the cold outside the pharmacy, waiting for the clerk to unlock the door so I could hand over a stack of crumpled bills for insulin. I told myself she was just different, that not everyone knows how to stay in the hard places. But the truth was, she knew. She just didn't want to. Standing in that ballroom tonight, hearing her say I'd lost my place, all of it came rushing back. The late-night bill payments, the meals skipped so Mom's fridge would stay full, the vacations I never took, the relationships I let wither because there was always one more emergency, one more check to write. I thought of the way Dad once patted my shoulder after I paid off the second mortgage, saying, "You've got a good head for responsibility." It wasn't a thank you. It was a reminder that, in their eyes, this was my role, my place. And now, apparently, it wasn't. I swirled the last of my gin, watching the ice catch the light. Somewhere between the years I gave them and this moment, they'd decided that my place was something they could reassign. Somewhere they'd mistaken my silence for consent, but if they thought losing my place meant losing my footing, they hadn't been paying attention. It was 3 nights before the cocktail hour when I found out exactly what my sister meant. I was at home going through my email when a message from an old family friend popped up, a man who still did odd jobs for my mother. The subject line was just, "Thought you should see this." Inside was a scanned copy of a public notice petition to transfer title listing my mother's house, the one I had been helping pay off for years. The new deed would place full ownership under a charitable foundation I'd never heard of, with my sister named as executive director. I thought it was some clerical mistake until I saw the filing date. It was the same day I'd wired money to cover Mom's property taxes, the same money that was supposed to keep her from losing the place. I started digging. County records showed the foundation had been incorporated only 3 months ago. Its stated mission was community health outreach, but the address was a P.O. box, and there were no staff listed besides my sister. The funding, initial endowment, the appraised value of Mom's home. I sat there staring at the screen, the air in my apartment suddenly too still. I remembered the times Mom had mentioned wanting to make sure the house stayed in the family. I remembered her promising that all my years of stepping in would be recognized when the time came. But this wasn't keeping it in the family. This was moving it out of reach entirely into a shell my sister controlled, where I'd have no claim. I called Martin, the attorney I'd seen at the cocktail hour. At first he was evasive, asking why I was concerned. When I pressed, his voice shifted, like he'd been waiting for me to connect the dots. He admitted he'd prepared 2 versions of Mom's estate documents in the past year. The original left the house equally to my sister and me. The one filed with the county last month replaced my share with a donation to the foundation. He wouldn't say who instructed him to make the change, only that your mother wanted to simplify things. I thought about those simplified things. Me covering utilities for the house during cold winters, so the pipes wouldn't freeze, me paying for the new roof after a hailstorm, me putting off my own dental work because there was always another repair that couldn't wait. I printed everything copies of the foundation's registration, the property transfer petition, both versions of the estate documents, and spread them out on my kitchen table. The neat lines of legal text felt colder than any argument we'd ever had. This wasn't just being left out, this was erasing me. I went to the bank the next morning and requested statements for every account I'd used to pay my parents' bills over the last decade. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars in mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance costs, all funneled into a house they now intended to sign over without my consent. The banker, a woman I'd known since high school, asked if I was planning to challenge it. I told her I was still deciding, but even as I said it, I knew deciding wasn't really the question anymore. It was a matter of how. That night, I called an old friend from college, Rachel, who now worked as an investigative journalist. Years ago, when she was drowning in student debt, I'd lent her enough to keep her from defaulting. I didn't tell her the full family history, just that there was a nonprofit I suspected was being used to move assets off the books. She didn't hesitate. "Send me what you've got," she said. "I'll see if it smells like a story." Within 24 hours, she'd found that the foundation had no tax filings, no program expenses, and no public record of any charitable work. What it did have was a line of credit secured against the house, taken out less than 2 weeks after it was transferred into the foundation's name. The authorized signatory on the loan was my sister. The amount was almost exactly what she'd need for the down payment on the waterfront condo she'd been talking about for years. By the time I hung up with Rachel, the shock had burned off, leaving only a quiet, focused anger. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad judgment call. It was deliberate. They'd taken everything I'd contributed and built a mechanism to make sure I could never claim a piece of it. And then she had the gall to stand beside me in a crowded room and tell me I'd lost my place, like it was some natural shift instead of a theft with paperwork. I sat at my kitchen table until well past midnight, highlighting dates, cross-referencing transactions, building a timeline so airtight even Martin wouldn't be able to twist it. Every yellow mark on the page was a year of my life I wouldn't get back, but it was also proof. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just keeping records to survive. I was preparing to act. The morning after I finished building the timeline, I called a lawyer. Not Martin, someone with no history to my family, no reason to smooth things over. Her name was Denise Harper, a sharp real estate and probate attorney recommended by a coworker. I emailed her every document I had, the 2 versions of the estate paperwork, the property transfer filing, the foundation's registration, the bank statements, and the records Rachel had uncovered. By the time we met in her office that afternoon, she'd already read through all of it. "This isn't sloppy," she said, tapping the foundation paperwork. "This is calculated." They built a paper trail to make it look like a charitable transfer, but the absence of any charitable activity undermines that defense. The loan they took out is worse. It's essentially leveraging stolen property. I sat across from her, my hands flat on the table. "What do I have to do to stop it?" She outlined a plan. File a petition to contest the transfer on grounds of fraud and undue influence, request an injunction to freeze the property from any further encumbrances, and initiate a civil suit against the foundation for restitution of every payment I'd made toward the house in the last decade. "It's going to get ugly," she warned. "Family cases always do, but with money and property involved, expect them to come at you hard." I told her they already had, just not in court yet. That night I sat down and drafted one final email to my mother, my sister, and my father. It was concise. I had retained legal counsel. I would no longer be making any payments on their behalf, and all communication about the house or the foundation would go through my attorney. I didn't invite discussion. I didn't ask for explanations. I sent it, turned off my phone, and slept for the first time in weeks without waking up in the middle of the night thinking about that envelope in Martin's hand. The next morning, the calls started. My mother's number lit up my phone 9 times before noon. My father left 2 voicemails, his tone swinging from wounded to furious. My sister sent 1 text. "You're overreacting. We can fix this without making it a circus." I didn't reply. Instead, I went with Denise to the courthouse to file the petition and the injunction. She moved through the process like she'd done it 100 times because she had, and within a few hours, a temporary order was in place. The house couldn't be sold, mortgaged, or transferred until the case was resolved. When the sheriff's deputy served the papers to my mother, my sister called again. This time, she left a voicemail, her voice dripping with indignation. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've embarrassed Mom and Dad in front of everyone. You've made this public. We're supposed to be family." I played it once, then saved it. A week later, I met Rachel at a cafe downtown. She slid a folded copy of the Sunday paper across the table. The front page of the local section carried her story. Questions raised over charity linked to family property transfer. She'd left my name out, per my request, but the details were unmistakable to anyone who knew us. The foundation's lack of filings, the suspicious loan, the timing of the transfer, it was all there. "They're going to hate me for this," I said, sipping my coffee. "Probably," Rachel said, "but they're also going to have a harder time pretending you're making it up." The fallout was immediate. A distant cousin messaged me to say my sister had been blowing up the family group chat, accusing me of trying to ruin her life. An old neighbor emailed to say she'd heard my parents were telling people I'd been misled by outsiders who wanted to hurt the family. Denise's office fielded a barrage of letters from my sister's attorney, most of them thinly veiled attempts to intimidate me into dropping the case. I didn't drop it. Instead, I doubled down. We subpoenaed the bank for the loan documents, and the signatures on them matched my sister's exactly. We obtained the original appraisal from when my parents refinanced the house 5 years ago, the one I'd paid for to get them a better rate, and compared it to the inflated number they'd used to justify the foundation's endowment. Denise said it was a textbook case of asset shielding. My parents didn't come to the preliminary hearing, but my sister did. She walked into the courtroom in a tailored blazer and heels, carrying a designer bag I suspected had been bought with the very loan she'd taken out against the house. She didn't look at me as she sat down across the aisle. When the judge granted the injunction in full, freezing the property until the fraud allegations were resolved, my sister's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Outside the courthouse, a reporter approached her for comment. I heard her say, "This is just a misunderstanding." My sister's confused. I kept walking. That night, I boxed up the last of my personal files from the small desk in my apartment that I'd used for all the bill payments and bank transfers over the years. It felt like shutting down a branch office I never applied to run. For years, I'd told myself that helping them was just what you did for family, that the accounting didn't matter as long as they were taken care of. But sitting in that courtroom, hearing the judge's gavel hit the desk, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. They hadn't just taken the money. They'd built an entire plan around the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. Now they knew better. The week after the injunction, the chaos began to bleed through every crack in their lives. It started with a voicemail from my mother, left just after midnight. Her voice was thin, almost trembling. "Your father's been on the phone all day with the bank. They say the property is frozen. We can't renew the loan for the roof repairs. You have to fix this." I let it sit unheard for hours before playing it. By the time I did, there were 4 more messages stacked behind it, 2 from Dad, 1 from my sister, and 1 from an unknown number I suspected was her new attorney. The next day, my phone lit up with 37 missed calls before noon. They tried every channel, calls, texts, emails, even Facebook messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, each one written in the same pleading, scolding tone. "She's your mother. We're family, not enemies. Don't let outsiders tear us apart." By the 3rd day, the panic had curdled into blame. Dad's voice was sharp now. "You've made this 10 times worse than it needed to be. Do you know what people are saying about us?" My sister's texts went from, "We can work this out," to, "You'll regret this," in less than a day. She accused me of humiliating her in front of her friends, of destroying the charity's reputation. She never once addressed the fact that there was no real charity, that she'd taken a loan against the house and had no intention of paying it back. That Thursday, Denise called to tell me they'd filed an emergency motion to lift the injunction, claiming irreparable harm to the family. We both knew it was a desperate move, but it meant I had to be in court again the next morning. My sister showed up with my parents this time. Mom's lips were pressed so tightly together they'd gone pale, and Dad kept his arms crossed like a barricade. They didn't speak to me before the hearing. Inside, their attorney painted a picture of a family under siege. A dutiful daughter, my sister, trying to protect her aging parents from misguided interference by another daughter, being influenced by external parties. Denise let them finish before sliding a stack of exhibits to the persons of stack. Judge, the foundation's non-existent tax filings, the loan paperwork with my sister's signature, the bank records of my payments toward the property stretching back more than a decade. The motion was denied in less than 15 minutes. When we left the courtroom, my parents walked right past me without a glance, my mother's perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. That weekend, Rachel called to tell me another article was running. This one went deeper, pulling in public records from the state charity regulator. It confirmed that the foundation had been flagged for non-compliance even before my lawsuit, and that the loan had already gone delinquent. My sister's name was now attached to a potential investigation. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones, that no amount of sleep can wash out. But I also felt something else relief. For once, I wasn't scrambling to patch the holes they'd made. I was letting them face the consequences themselves. The calls kept coming, but their tone shifted again. Mom's messages were tearful now, full of nostalgia about my childhood, about the good years before we all grew apart. Dad's were clipped, almost businesslike, asking if we could come to terms privately before more damage was done. My sister alternated between silence and venom, once leaving a single-line voicemail. "You've ruined everything." On the fourth day, she showed up at my apartment. I didn't buzz her in. She stood outside long enough for my downstairs neighbor to text me. "There's a woman here in heels banging on your door." When she finally left, there was an envelope wedged into the doorframe. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten note from my mother, the kind she used to tape to the fridge. It read, "You are still my daughter. Please remember that." I set it on the counter and walked away. Denise warned me that their finances would start to unravel quickly now that they couldn't use the house as collateral. She was right. By the end of the month, Dad's truck had been repossessed. The charity bank account was frozen, and I heard from a cousin that my sister had moved out of her condo after missing 2 mortgage payments. The family group chat went silent. No guilt-laced invitations, no passive-aggressive updates about family events I wasn't attending. Just nothing. And for the first time, I realized that silence could be a gift. I still kept every voicemail, every text, every letter. Not because I needed to relive them, but because they were part of the record now. A record that told the truth they'd spent years trying to bury. And I was done letting them write the story without me. 2 weeks after the emergency motion failed, my cousin Emily invited me to what she called a catch-up dinner. She booked a private dining room at a quiet Italian place we used to go to as kids, but the second I stepped inside, I knew exactly what it was. My parents sat together on one side of the table, my sister opposite them, arms crossed, her expression rehearsed into a mask of righteous indignation. Emily was at the head of the table, smiling too brightly, clearly hoping she could play peacemaker in a fight she didn't understand. There were no menus, no drinks ordered, no small talk. It was an ambush. My father opened with, "We don't understand why you're doing this to us." Like the past months hadn't happened, like the documents I'd filed and the judge's orders were just rumors they could brush aside. My sister leaned in before I could answer. "You've always resented me. This is just your excuse to get back at me." I didn't raise my voice. I placed a folder on the table and flipped it open so they could see the neat columns of dates and amounts. "This is every payment I've made toward the house since 2011. Mortgage, property tax, repairs, every cent documented." My mother's eyes darted to the numbers, but she said nothing. My sister smirked. "That was your choice. No one made you do it." I looked her straight in the eye. It was my choice to help. It wasn't my choice to have my share erased behind my back, or to watch you take out a loan against the house for your condo. My father leaned back, folding his arms like a verdict. "You're making this ugly." "No," I said evenly. "I'm making it honest." Then I slid across the loan agreement from the bank, her signature in blue ink, the date falling just after the property transfer. My sister's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. My mother finally spoke. "We thought this would be simpler. You've got your own life. You don't need the house." I almost laughed. "You mean the life I put on hold for 15 years to take care of you, to keep that roof from collapsing? That life?" The silence was heavy. I gathered the papers, stood, and told them, "From now on, all communication goes through my attorney. I'm done with these performances." My mother's voice followed me to the door. "If you walk out, don't expect to be welcome again." I turned just long enough to say, "You made that choice the day you signed me out of the deed." Outside, the air was cold and sharp, cutting the heat of the room from my skin. My hands weren't shaking. In the days after, they switched tactics. My sister emailed about a holiday recipe as if nothing had happened. My father left a voicemail about a neighbor's death, hoping shared news might bridge the gulf. My mother sent a birthday card with no message inside, just her name. I didn't answer any of it. Denise filed our restitution claim, and the court date was set. Meanwhile, the state charity regulator opened an investigation into the foundation. The loan was in default. Foreclosure notices were being prepared for my sister's condo. One night, near midnight, a knock came at my door. Through the peephole, I saw my mother in her coat holding a manila envelope. I didn't open it. She called softly, "Your father's sleeping on the couch. Your sister's moving back in. The bank's threatening to take the house." I stayed silent. I didn't know where else to go. She tried again. I said, "Call a lawyer or a financial counselor, but not me." Then after a pause, her voice hardened. "I gave you life, and this is how you repay us?" I leaned against the door. "You gave me life, and then you acted like I owed it to you forever." Her footsteps retreated down the hall. I didn't watch her leave. Inside, the apartment was still. For the first time in years, the quiet felt like freedom. By the time spring rolled around, the case had shifted from a crisis into a slow, steady grind. Denise and I were in regular contact, her updates no longer sending a jolt of dread through me. Every filing, every exchange of evidence, felt less like a personal attack and more like an item on a checklist. The hearing for my restitution claim was set for a Wednesday morning. I took the day off work, put on the Navy suit I'd once bought for job interviews, and met Denise at the courthouse. My parents didn't show, but my sister arrived with her attorney, her hair pulled tight, wearing a blazer that looked like armor. She didn't glance at me. Inside, their attorney tried to frame the years of payments I'd made as voluntary support, insisting I'd never been promised a stake in the house. Denise stayed calm, methodically walking the judge through the timeline I'd built: every mortgage payment matched to a due date, every property tax receipt, every invoice for repairs I'd covered. Then she produced the original estate documents naming me as co-heir, followed by the altered version filed months ago. The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw him make notes. When Denise brought up the foundation's loan default and laid the foreclosure notice on the bench, their attorney objected. The judge overruled him. "It goes to intent," he said simply. Less than 2 hours later, the ruling came: full restitution for the documented amount plus interest, and the injunction on the house would remain until the fraud allegations were resolved. I stepped out into the hallway, the gavel's echo still in my ears, feeling something uncoil in my chest. Outside, the air was crisp, the sunlight almost too bright. Denise shook my hand, congratulated me, and reminded me to expect an appeal. "They won't stop here," she said. "They never do," I answered. Over the next month, the fallout spread like cracks in ice. The state charity regulator formally revoked the foundation's nonprofit status. Without that shield, the property transfer triggered a county review, and Martin, my parents' longtime attorney, quietly withdrew from representing them. A neighbor emailed to say my father had been asking for recommendations for a bankruptcy lawyer. I didn't reply. My sister's condo hit the auction listings. The photos her prized waterfront view, the glossy kitchen she used to post online, circulated among relatives. Most pretended they hadn't seen them. I stayed out of the gossip. I didn't need to watch it collapse to know it was falling. The calls from my parents stopped altogether. Not even the guilt-laden notes came anymore. For the first time in years, there was no one trying to reel me back into the role I'd left. The silence felt steady, like the sea after a storm. One afternoon, I stopped at the bank to deposit a freelance check. The teller, who'd known me since high school, lowered her voice as she handed me the receipt. "I heard about your case. Good for you. Not many people would have had the guts." I didn't know how to explain that it hadn't been about courage so much as finally refusing to be the one holding the net for everyone else. In May, Rachel called. "The state's considering a criminal investigation into the foundation," she said. "If they go forward, you might be called as a witness." I told her I'd be there. I thought of all the times I'd shown up for them without thanks, without recognition, simply because they expected it. This time, I'd be showing up for the truth, and for myself. That night, I opened the box where I'd kept every document, every receipt, every scrap of proof. I went through it page by page, not out of anger anymore, but to remind myself how far I'd come. When I was done, I sealed the lid and slid it to the back of my closet. It was still part of my history, but it no longer needed to sit in the middle of my life. The next morning, I drank my coffee on the balcony, watching the street wake up below, buses hissing to a stop, a dog barking, sunlight spilling across the buildings. There was nothing waiting for me in my voicemail, no crisis demanding my money, my time, or my silence. For the first time in years, the day ahead was entirely my own. It was early June when the envelope arrived, thick cream paper, my name written in my mother's looping script. No return address, but I knew it was from them before I even picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of lined stationery. "Family meeting," it read, followed by a date, time, and their address. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, she'd added, "Please come, for me. No apology, no explanation." I set it on the counter and let it sit there for 2 days, before sliding it back into the envelope and dropping it in a drawer. The date came and went. I didn't go. I heard about it afterward from a cousin who couldn't help herself. My sister had tried to clear the air, but ended up screaming at my father over the loan. My mother had cried in the kitchen while guests picked at cold sandwiches. They called it a disaster. I called it predictable. That summer was the quietest I'd had in years. Work picked up. I booked a weekend trip to the coast. I walked the shoreline in the evenings until the sky turned dark. Without the constant pull of their needs, I found space in my head I didn't know I'd been missing. Space to think about the years I'd given them, how I'd measured every decision against what they might need next, how I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace meant keeping myself small. In late August, Denise called with the final word. The court had voided the property transfer, reinstated the original estate documents, and ordered the house sold to repay debts, including the loan my sister had taken out. After the sale, there would be nothing left to fight over. "It's done," she said. I thanked her, but the words felt too light for the weight that lifted off me. That evening, another letter came from my mother. "The house will be gone soon," it said. "I thought you should hear it from me. We never meant to hurt you." No signature from my father, nothing from my sister. I put it in the box with all the others. Months ago, those words would have cracked something in me. Now they felt like air passing through an open door. They had meant to, whether they admitted it or not, because they'd chosen to. A week later, I met Rachel for lunch. She asked if I felt vindicated. I told her no. What I felt was space, and the strange lightness of knowing I didn't owe anyone an explanation. We said goodbye on the sidewalk, and I walked home past shop windows filled with the first signs of fall. That night, a formal letter from the bank arrived, inviting me to attend the closing of the house as an heir. I read it once, then dropped it in the trash. I didn't need to stand in the room where they signed away what I'd kept alive for so long. The ending had already happened. On the last day of September, I drove to the coast and rented a cabin with a deck that looked out over the water. In the morning, I sat outside with a mug of coffee and listened to the tide come in. No phone calls, no messages waiting, no quiet dread in the pit of my stomach. Just the ocean, steady and indifferent, and the wind pulling at my jacket. I thought about how many years I'd tried to be that steady for them, taking the impact of every wave so they wouldn't have to. It had never made them love me more. It had only made it easier for them to take. By afternoon, the light shifted, turning the water silver. I stayed out until the horizon blurred into dusk. Somewhere far away, my sister was probably telling a version of this story where she was the victim, my parents were misunderstood, and I had overreacted. She could keep it. I didn't need to correct her. The people who mattered knew the truth, and so did I. When darkness fell, I went inside, locked the door, and felt the kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission. In the stillness, I said it aloud, just to hear it in the air. My place was never theirs to give, and it was never theirs to take.